The morning sun cast long shadows across Haven Valley as Jake Morrison stood on his office balcony, watching the daily bustle of New Terra's largest settlement. 50,000 people called this place home, and Jake had been their governor for 8 years now. He liked to think he had done a good job keeping everyone safe and happy. The colony stretched out before him like a small city from old Earth. Children ran to school while their parents headed to work in the mines, farms, or the small factories that produced everything the colony needed. The spaceport hummed with activity as supply ships arrived from other human worlds, bringing news and goods from across the galaxy. Jake had been born here, just like his father before him. The old man used to tell stories about the war, the great conflict that had ended 40 years ago when Jake was just a boy. Stories of brave soldiers who fought against impossible odds, of space battles that lasted for days, of heroes who saved entire worlds with nothing but courage and determination. Most people dismiss those stories now. The war was history, something that happened to other people in other places. New Terra had been founded after the peace treaty, far from the old battlefields. The colonists had built their lives around farming, mining, and trade. They had security officers to deal with the occasional drunk or petty thief, but nothing more serious than that. Dr. Lisa Warren walked through the corridors of the colony hospital, checking on her patients. She was 35 years old, born on New Terra just like most of the colonists. Her parents had been among the first settlers, and she had grown up hearing the same war stories that everyone else did. As a doctor, she treated the elderly veterans who still lived in the colony, men and women who claimed to have served in the great battles. Lisa respected these old soldiers, but she often wondered how much of their stories were true. They spoke of weapons that could destroy entire cities, of soldiers who could fight for days without rest, of commanders who never lost a battle. It sounded like fantasy to her, stories that had grown larger with each telling. Her brother Danny was different. He was 5 years younger and worked as a pilot, flying supply runs between the scattered settlements across New Terra. Danny loved the old stories and believed every word. He would sit for hours listening to the veterans talk about their adventures, his eyes wide with excitement. "Don't you think it's amazing what they did?" Danny would ask his sister. "Fighting against aliens with technology we could barely understand, holding the line while civilians escaped to safety?" Lisa would just smile and shake her head. "They're good stories, Danny, but that's all they are, stories." Captain Ben Cross commanded the colony's security forces, all 200 of them. His job was to keep the peace, investigate crimes, and handle emergencies. His officers carried simple weapons and drove patrol vehicles designed for civilian use. They were police officers, not soldiers, and Ben was fine with that. The colony had never faced a real threat. The worst incident in recent memory had been when a group of miners had gotten into a fight over working conditions. Ben had resolved it with talk and compromise, the way civilized people should handle problems. Violence was for the old days, for the war stories that the veterans told. Ben had heard those stories too, of course. Everyone had. Tales of Commander Alex Kane, the legendary soldier who had supposedly won the war single-handedly. According to the stories, Kane could outsmart any enemy, inspire any soldier, and turn any defeat into victory. The veterans spoke of him with reverence, as if he had been more than human. Kane held off 3 enemy fleets at the Battle of Centauri, old Eddie Price would say whenever he had a few drinks. Just him and a handful of volunteers, buying time for the evacuation ships. They say he destroyed 100 enemy ships before reinforcements arrived. Ben would nod politely, but he knew better. No one person could do such things. Wars were won by technology, resources, and numbers, not by individual heroes. The stories were just that, stories told by old men who wanted to feel important. The first sign of trouble came on a Tuesday morning. Danny was returning from a supply run to the eastern settlements when he noticed something odd on his ship's sensors. 3 objects were moving through the outer system, too large to be asteroids and too regular to be natural. Danny tried to get a better look, but the objects were too far away. He reported the sighting to traffic control, who logged it as probably debris from an old mining operation. No one was particularly concerned. 2 days later, the objects were closer. Jake Morrison received a report from the colony's small observatory that 3 artificial structures were approaching New Terra. They were still beyond the range of detailed scans, but they were definitely made by intelligent beings, Jake called. An emergency meeting of the Colony Council. Dr. Warren attended as the chief medical officer, along with Captain Cross and the heads of the various departments. They discussed the situation in calm, reasonable voices. Could be traders from one of the outer systems, suggested the Commerce Director. We've had contact with new species before. Or maybe explorers, added the science officer. The galaxy is full of civilizations we haven't met yet. Jake nodded. I'll try to establish communication. If they're friendly, we'll welcome them. If they're not, well, we'll figure something out. None of them imagined that their quiet world was about to become a battlefield. None of them believed that the old war stories might be about to become reality again. They were peaceful people, living peaceful lives, and they could not conceive of the violence that was coming their way. The 3 ships continued their approach, silent and ominous against the star-filled sky. The 3 ships arrived at dawn on a Friday morning, their massive hulls blocking out the sunrise as they descended through New Terra's atmosphere. Jake Morrison stood in the colony's communication center, trying to make contact with the vessels, but his calls went unanswered. The ships were unlike anything he had ever seen, dark and angular with surfaces that seemed to shift and change in the light. Still no response to our signals, reported the communication officer, a young woman named Kate Barnes. They're not using any standard protocols. Jake frowned as he watched the ships through the center's windows. They were enormous, each one easily the size of a city block. Strange protrusions covered their hulls, and he could see smaller craft moving around them like insects around a hive. Something about their design made him feel uncomfortable, though he could not say why. Keep trying, he told Kate. Maybe they just don't understand our language yet. The ships settled into hover positions above the colony's 3 main districts. They hung there silently, casting long shadows over the buildings below. People stopped their morning routines to stare up at the alien vessels, pointing and talking. In excited whispers, children pressed their faces against school windows, and workers gathered in groups on the streets. Dr. Lisa Warren was in the middle of her morning rounds when the first attack began. She was checking on an elderly patient when the building shook violently, throwing her against the wall. The lights flickered and went out, replaced by the red glow of emergency power. Through the window, she could see bright flashes of light. Coming from the direction of the government building, the alien ships had opened fire without warning. Beams of crackling energy struck the colony's most important structures with surgical precision. The communication array exploded in a shower of sparks and debris. The power station's main generator went dark. The spaceport's control tower collapsed. In a cloud of smoke and flame, Captain Ben Cross was at the security headquarters when the attack started. He felt the building shake and heard the distant sound of explosions. His officers looked at him with confusion and fear, waiting for orders that he did not know how to give. Nothing in his training had prepared him for this. "Get everyone to the emergency stations," he shouted over the noise. "Activate the civil defense protocols." But the protocols were designed for natural disasters, not alien invasion. His officers ran to their posts, but their equipment was useless against energy weapons and advanced technology. Their small arms and patrol vehicles might as well have been toys. The alien ships began landing in the colony's central plaza, crushing buildings and vehicles under their massive weight. Ramps extended from their hulls, and the invaders poured out in organized formations. They were tall creatures with hard, shiny shells that covered their bodies like armor. They had 4 arms and moved with quick, precise movements that reminded Lisa of insects. Each alien soldier carried a weapon that fired bolts of blue energy. The weapons made no sound when they fired, but anything they hit simply disappeared in a flash of light. The aliens advanced through the streets in perfect coordination, their movements synchronized like a single organism. Danny Warren was at the spaceport when the aliens landed there. He watched in horror as the creatures swarmed over the landing pads, destroying or capturing every ship they could find. His own supply runner was caught in the middle of the attack. Its hull cracked open by enemy fire. He tried to reach his ship, but the aliens had already established a perimeter around the spaceport. Their weapons cut down anyone who tried to approach. Danny saw his fellow pilots fall one by one, their bodies dissolving in the blue energy beams. He turned and ran, his heart pounding with terror. The alien commander emerged from the largest ship, a creature even taller than the others with additional armor plating and more complex weapons. It spoke in a voice that somehow reached every corner of the colony, transmitted through devices that the aliens had quickly installed. "I am Hive Lord Vexstar of the Zephyrian Collective," the voice announced. "This world now belongs to us. Your species will serve or be eliminated. Resistance is pointless." Jake Morrison tried to organize a response from the government building, but the aliens had cut all communication systems. He could not contact the other settlements or send a message to the Colonial Defense Force. The colony was completely isolated. Cut off from the rest of human space, Ben Cross attempted to mount a defense with his security forces, but the aliens were too advanced and too numerous. His officers' weapons barely scratched the enemy's armor, while the alien energy beams cut through their protective gear like paper. Within the first hour, half of his force was dead or wounded. The aliens moved with terrifying efficiency, securing key locations and rounding up civilians. They seemed to know exactly where everything was, as if they had studied the colony for a long time before attacking. They captured the hospital, the schools, the factories, and the residential areas with minimal resistance. Dr. Warren found herself trapped in the hospital with dozens of wounded colonists. The aliens had surrounded the building but had not entered it yet. She worked frantically to treat the injured, but many of her patients had wounds that she could not heal with conventional medicine. "What do they want?" asked one of the wounded security officers. Lisa did not know how to answer. The aliens had spoken of service or elimination, but what did that mean? She thought of the old war stories, the tales of alien invaders who had once threatened humanity. Perhaps those stories had not been fantasies after all. The day ended with the colony under complete alien control. The Zephyrians had established guard posts throughout Haven Valley, and their ships continued to patrol the skies. The colonists huddled in their homes, afraid to venture outside. The peaceful world they had known was gone, replaced by something dark and frightening. Jake Morrison sat in his office, now under alien guard, and wondered if anyone would ever know what had happened to New Terra. 3 weeks had passed since the Zephyrians took control of New Terra, and life in Haven Valley had become a nightmare. The aliens had divided the colonists into work groups, forcing them to mine rare metals from the mountains and harvest crops to feed the growing alien fleet. Anyone who refused to work was taken away and never seen again. Elena Rodriguez had been a teacher at the colony's primary school before the invasion. Now she found herself leading a group of 200 survivors who had managed to escape the alien work camps. They hid in the old mining tunnels beneath the eastern mountains, moving carefully through the darkness to avoid the alien patrols that searched for them day and night. The tunnels were cold and damp, but they provided shelter from the Zephyrian sonic weapons that could track humans across open ground. Elena had never imagined herself as a leader, but the other survivors looked to her for guidance. She made the hard decisions about food rationing, patrol schedules, and when to risk supply runs to the abandoned settlements. Dr. Lisa Warren had joined the resistance after escaping from the hospital during an alien prisoner transfer. She now served as the group's only medical officer, treating injuries and illnesses with whatever supplies they could scavenge. The aliens had destroyed most of the medical facilities, leaving her to work with basic first aid kits and improvised tools. Danny Warren had become one of the Resistance's best scouts, using his knowledge of the colony's layout to guide supply, missions, and rescue operations. His pilot training helped him navigate the dangerous terrain around the alien checkpoints. He had seen his fellow pilots killed or captured, and the memory filled him with anger that drove him to take greater risks. The Resistance had tried several attacks against the aliens, but their weapons were no match for Zephyrian technology. Energy shields deflected their bullets, and the aliens' armor was too thick for conventional firearms to penetrate. Worse, the aliens seemed to anticipate their moves, setting traps and ambush that cost the Resistance valuable people. "We need better weapons," said Frank Miller, a former security officer who had joined the Resistance after his unit was destroyed. "These old hunting rifles won't even scratch their armor." Elena nodded grimly. They had discussed this problem many times, but no one had a solution. The aliens had captured or destroyed all the military equipment in the colony, leaving the Resistance with civilian weapons that were useless against advanced technology. The breakthrough came when old Eddie Price remembered something from his youth. He had been a maintenance worker during the original colonization, helping to build the settlements and survey the surrounding territory. He recalled finding strange structures in the mountains that had been sealed off by the military. "There was a place up north," Eddie told the group around their small campfire, "hidden in the rocks where the old survey teams found caves. But they weren't natural caves. The military came and put locks on everything, said it was classified." Elena felt a spark of hope. "Do you think you could find it again?" Eddie scratched his gray beard. "Been 40 years, but I remember the landmarks. There was a waterfall shaped like a broken arrow, and 3 peaks that looked like fingers pointing at the sky." The next morning, Elena selected a small team for the dangerous journey north. She chose Danny for his scouting skills, Dr. Warren for her medical knowledge, Frank Miller for protection, and Eddie to guide them. They would travel at night and hide during the day, avoiding the alien patrols that had increased their activity in recent days. The journey took 3 days through rough mountain terrain. They moved slowly, checking every ridge and valley for signs of Zephyrian activity. The aliens had established monitoring posts throughout the region, using devices that could detect human movement from great distances. On the second night, they encountered an alien patrol. 4 Zephyrian soldiers were scanning the area with handheld devices, their insect-like heads turning back and forth as they searched for signs of human presence. The Resistance team hid among the rocks, barely breathing as the aliens passed within meters of their position. Eddie found the landmarks on the 3rd day. The waterfall was smaller than he remembered, and vegetation had grown over many of the paths, but the basic geography was unchanged. They found the cave entrance hidden behind a curtain of vines and moss. Just as Eddie had described, the entrance was sealed with a heavy metal door marked with military symbols and warning signs. The lock was old but still functional, requiring an access code that none of them knew. Frank tried to force it open, but the door was too strong for their tools. "Wait," said Dr. Warren, examining the door more closely. "Look at this panel. It's not just a lock, it's a scanner." She placed her hand on the smooth surface, and to everyone's surprise, the door responded with a soft beep. Green lights flickered along the frame, and mechanical sounds came from within the wall. "How did you know to do that?" asked Elena. Lisa looked puzzled. "I didn't, I just had a feeling." The door slid open with a grinding sound, revealing a tunnel that stretched into darkness. Cool air flowed from the opening, carrying the scent of metal and electronics. Emergency lights flickered to life along the walls, creating a path deeper into the mountain. The tunnel led to a vast underground chamber, filled with equipment that looked far more advanced than anything in the colony. Computers hummed quietly. In the darkness, their screens showing readouts and data streams. Weapon racks lined the walls, holding firearms that gleamed with perfect maintenance. "What is this place?" whispered Frank, his voice echoing in the large space. A new voice answered, from speakers hidden in the walls. "Welcome to Emergency Station Alpha. I am Athena, the facility's artificial intelligence system. I have been waiting for authorized personnel to arrive." Elena stepped forward, her heart pounding. "Who are you? What is this place?" This facility was established during the Human-Zephyrian War as a resistance support base. It was designed to provide resources and coordination for insurgency operations behind enemy lines. "I have been monitoring communications and have detected the current invasion of your colony. The AI's voice was calm and professional, but Elena could hear something else in it, a sense of purpose that had been waiting for decades to be fulfilled. The base contains weapons, medical supplies, communication equipment, and strategic intelligence. However, full activation requires the presence of authorized military personnel. Are there any veterans of the previous war among your group? Eddie Price stepped forward slowly. I served as a maintenance tech during the war. Does that count? Scanning biometric data, Athena responded. Identity confirmed. Edward Price, maintenance technician 2nd class. Colonial Defense Force, authorization level insufficient for full activation. However, emergency protocols allow limited access during active invasion scenarios. The lights in the chamber grew brighter and more systems came online. Elena felt a surge of hope as she realized they had found something that might change the balance of power. Athena guided the resistance team through the hidden base, showing them rooms filled with equipment that seemed impossible to Elena's eyes. The medical bay contained healing devices that could mend broken bones in hours and cure infections instantly. The weapons locker held firearms that fired energy bolts similar to the Zephyrian weapons but designed for human hands. This technology is incredible, Dr. Warren said as she examined the medical equipment. It's decades ahead of anything we had in the colony. The base was designed to support long-term resistance operations, Athena explained. Commander Kane insisted on the most advanced equipment available, even if it meant using experimental technology. Elena stopped walking. Commander Kane? The one from the old stories? Alexander Kane was the architect of humanity's victory in the previous war. He established this network of bases throughout the sector as insurance against future Zephyrian aggression. His tactical analyses proved accurate. The enemy has indeed returned. Frank Miller picked up one of the energy weapons, testing its weight and balance. If Kane was so great, where is he now? Why isn't he here to help us? Athena's response came after a long pause. Commander Kane is present in this facility. He has been in medical suspension for the past 40 years, recovering from severe injuries sustained during the war's final battle. The silence that followed was broken only by the hum of machinery. Elena felt her heart racing as she processed what the AI had said. He's here? Now? Alive? Commander Kane's condition is stable, but his revival carries significant risks. The suspension system was designed for temporary use, not for decades of continuous operation. However, current threat levels may justify the medical dangers involved. Dr. Warren immediately became professional. I need to see him. I need to understand his condition before we make any decisions. Athena led them to a section of the base that Elena had not seen before. The corridor was lined with windows that looked into a medical chamber filled with complex machinery. In the center was a bed surrounded by monitors and life support equipment. A man lay motionless on the bed, his face peaceful but pale. Commander Kane's body has been maintained in perfect condition, Athena said. His injuries from the final battle have healed, but the psychological trauma was severe. The suspension system has kept him stable, but revival will require careful monitoring. Elena stared at the figure on the bed. He looked younger than she had expected, perhaps in his 40s, with dark hair and a face that seemed familiar somehow. This was the man from the stories, the legend who had saved humanity from the Zephyrian threat. What were his injuries? Dr. Warren asked, studying the medical readouts. Multiple trauma from explosive decompression, severe burns from energy weapons, and psychological damage from extended combat stress. The final battle lasted 17 hours, during which Commander Kane single-handedly held off 3 Zephyrian fleets to allow civilian evacuation. Danny Warren whistled softly. The stories were true. The stories were often understated, Athena corrected. Commander Kane's actual achievements exceeded most accounts. However, the cost was considerable. He collapsed immediately after the battle and has remained unconscious since entering suspension. Elena faced a decision that terrified her. They had found a legendary hero, but he might not survive the revival process. Even if he did, There was no guarantee that he would be the same man who had won the war decades ago. "What are our alternatives?" she asked. "This base contains sufficient resources to support extended resistance operations. However, the Zephyrian fleet is growing stronger each day. Intelligence indicates they are preparing to use New Terra as a staging ground for attacks on other human worlds. Without expert leadership, the probability of successful resistance is low." Frank Miller shook his head. "We can't put our hopes on one man, legend or not. What if he wakes up and can't fight anymore? What if 40 years of sleep has changed him? The risk is significant," Athena acknowledged. "But Commander Kane's tactical knowledge and experience are irreplaceable. He understood Zephyrian psychology and strategy better than any human before or since. His presence alone would boost morale among human forces." Eddie Price had been quiet during the discussion, but now he spoke up. "I remember him from the old days. He wasn't just a great soldier, he was a great leader. He made people believe they could win even when everything seemed hopeless." Dr. Warren continued studying the medical data. "The revival process will take several hours and require constant monitoring. If something goes wrong, we might lose him permanently." Elena looked around at her companions. They were tired, frightened people who had been fighting a losing battle for weeks. They needed hope, something to believe in. But she also knew that hope based on false promises could be more dangerous than despair. "Athena, what would Commander Kane want us to do?" Based on his psychological profile and previous statements, Commander Kane would prioritize the mission above his personal safety. He once said that leaders exist to make the hard choices that others cannot make. The AI paused, then continued. "However, he also believed that every person has the right to choose their own fate. If you decide to revive him, he must be given the choice of whether to fight or rest." Elena realized that the decision was not just about waking up a legendary hero. It was about whether they were willing to ask someone who had already given everything to sacrifice even more. Kane had earned his rest, but humanity needed him again. "There's something else," Athena said quietly. "The revival process will trigger base-wide activation. The Zephyrians will detect the energy signatures and realize that this facility exists. Once we begin, there will be no hiding." The weight of the choice settled on Elena's shoulders. Reviving Kane would give them a chance to win, but it would also paint a target on their location. They would have to be ready to fight immediately, with no time for preparation or second thoughts. She looked at the sleeping figure again and made her decision. "Dr. Warren, prepare for the revival procedure. We're going to wake him up." Dr. Warren worked carefully with Athena to prepare the revival procedure while Elena and the others monitored the base's defensive systems. The process was more complex than anything Lisa had ever attempted, requiring precise timing and constant adjustment of the medical equipment. One mistake could kill the man they were trying to save. "Heart rate is stabilizing," Athena reported as the suspension fluid drained from the medical chamber. "Brain activity is increasing to normal levels. Revival will be complete in approximately 2 hours." Elena watched the monitors anxiously. Outside the base, Zephyrian patrols were increasing their search patterns, drawn by the energy signatures that the revival process was creating. The aliens knew something was happening in the mountains, but they had not yet located the hidden entrance. "Contact," Danny Warren called from the surveillance station. 6 Zephyrian soldiers approaching from the northwest. "They're using deep scan equipment." Frank Miller checked his weapon and moved toward the defensive positions. "How long can we hold them off?" "The base's shields can withstand direct assault for several hours," Athena replied. "However, prolonged engagement will reveal our location to the main Zephyrian fleet. Stealth remains our primary advantage." Commander Kane's eyes opened slowly, blinking against the bright lights of the medical bay. For a moment he looked confused, as if he could not remember where he was or why he was there. Then his training took over, and he sat up quickly, scanning the room for threats. "Easy," Dr. Warren said, placing a gentle hand on his shoulder. "You're safe. You're in Emergency Station Alpha." Kane looked at her with sharp blue eyes that seemed to take in every detail of her appearance. "How long?" he asked, his voice rough from disuse. 40 years, Elena answered from the doorway. "The war ended, but now the Zephyrians are back." Kane closed his eyes for a moment, processing the information. When he opened them again, Elena saw something that frightened her, a deep weariness that went beyond physical exhaustion. This man had fought too many battles and seen too much death. "Show me," he said simply. Athena projected a holographic display showing the current situation on New Terra. The Zephyrian fleet had grown to 12 ships, with more arriving each day. The aliens had established mining operations across the planet, and were constructing what appeared to be a massive communication array. "They're building a hyperspace beacon," Kane said after studying the display. "This isn't just an invasion, it's preparation for a larger assault. They're planning to use New Terra as a staging point for attacks on other human worlds." Elena felt a chill run down her spine. "How many people will die?" "Millions," Kane replied without emotion. "The Zephyrians learned from their previous defeat. This time, they won't make the mistake of underestimating human determination." Danny Warren burst into the medical bay. "Commander, we've got incoming. 3 Zephyrian ships heading straight for the mountain. They've found us." Kane stood up, testing his balance. Dr. Warren tried to stop him, but he waved her away. Fine, Athena, activate full defensive protocols." "How many people do we have?" 200 resistance fighters in the tunnels below," Elena replied. "Most are civilians with minimal training." "That's 200 more than I had at the Battle of Centauri," Kane said grimly. "We'll make it work." The base shook as the first Zephyrian energy beam struck the mountain above them. The shields held, but Kane knew they would not last long under sustained assault. He moved to the command center, his hands flying over controls that he had not touched in 4 decades. "The Zephyrians will try to dig us out," he explained to the others. "They'll use mining equipment to tunnel through the rock. We need to hit them before they can establish a perimeter." Elena watched as Kane transformed from a tired man into a military commander. His movements became precise and economical, every gesture serving a purpose. She began to understand why the stories had made him seem larger than life. "Frank, take 20 fighters and secure the north tunnel. Danny, I need you to pilot one of the interceptors in the hangar." "Elena, you're with me. We're going to coordinate the counterattack." The young teacher felt overwhelmed. "I don't know anything about military tactics." "You've kept 200 people alive for 3 weeks against impossible odds," Kane replied. "You know more than you think." The Zephyrian assault intensified, and the base's shields began to fluctuate. Kane studied the tactical display, calculating angles and timing with the precision of a machine. Elena realized that this was what made him legendary, not superhuman strength or impossible courage, but the ability to see patterns and possibilities that others missed. "They're making a mistake," Kane said suddenly. "They're concentrating their fire on the wrong section of the mountain. Athena, can you simulate a shield failure in Sector 7? "Oh, affirmative." "The Zephyrians will believe they have breached our defenses." "Good. When they send ground forces to investigate, we'll be waiting." Elena watched the plan unfold on the tactical display. Kane was using the aliens' own efficiency against them, turning their logical approach into a trap. It was brilliant, but it required perfect timing and coordination. "Are you sure this will work?" she asked. Kane looked at her with eyes that had seen too much war. "Nothing is ever sure in battle. But sometimes, when people are counting on you, you have to try anyway." The first phase of the counterattack began as Zephyrian soldiers entered a false breach. They moved in perfect formation, just as Kane had predicted. The resistance fighters were waiting for them, armed with the advanced weapons from the base's arsenal. The battle for New Terra's future had begun, and Elena realized that the legends were not just stories after all. The trap worked perfectly. 20 Zephyrian soldiers entered the false breach, expecting to find damaged equipment and fleeing humans. Instead, they walked into a crossfire from resistance fighters armed with military-grade energy weapons. The alien surprise lasted only seconds. But that was enough. Frank Miller led the ambush with calm precision, his security training finally useful against a real threat. The advanced weapons cut through Zephyrian armor like it was paper, and the aliens fell one by one. For the first time since the invasion began, humans were winning a battle. Phase 1 complete, Kane announced over the communication system. Danny, begin your attack run. Elena, signal the main resistance force. Danny Warren sat in the cockpit of an interceptor fighter, his hands steady on the controls despite his racing heart. The ship was unlike anything he had ever flown, responding to his thoughts almost before he moved the controls. Through the cockpit window, he could see the 3 Zephyrian ships hovering above the mountain. Target the command ship first, Kane's voice came through the radio. Their formation will collapse if we take out the leader. Danny dove toward the largest enemy vessel, his fighters' weapons charging automatically. The Zephyrians detected his approach and turned their guns toward him, but he was already moving, weaving between their energy beams with impossible speed. The interceptor's advanced systems made him feel like a different person, capable of feats that should have been impossible. His first shot struck the command ship's bridge, sending chunks of metal spinning into space. The alien vessel staggered but did not fall. Danny circled for another attack, dodging return fire that lit up the sky around him. In the base's command center, Elena watched the battle unfold on the tactical display. She could see the positions of every resistance fighter, every enemy unit, every weapon that was being fired. Kane stood beside her, calling out orders and adjustments with the calm confidence of someone who had done this many times before. The aliens are regrouping, she observed. They're pulling back from the mountain. Good, Kane replied. That means they're starting to respect us. Fear is a weapon too. The second phase of the attack began when the main resistance force emerged from the tunnels throughout the mountain range. 200 fighters appeared at once, hitting Zephyrian positions from multiple directions. They moved with coordination that surprised the aliens, who had expected only scattered groups of frightened civilians. Dr. Warren worked frantically in the medical bay, treating wounded resistance fighters as they were brought in from the battle. The advanced medical equipment saved lives that would have been lost with conventional treatment, but she could see the cost of the fighting in every injured person who came through her doors. How many have we lost? She asked Eddie Price, who was coordinating the casualty reports. 15 dead, 30 wounded, he replied grimly. But we've killed over 100 aliens. That's better than anyone expected. The battle raged for 3 hours, with neither side able to gain a decisive advantage. The resistance fighters were better armed and more motivated than before, but the Zephyrians still had superior numbers and technology. Kane knew that this was only the beginning. Athena, any word from the Colonial Defense Force? He asked, long range. Communications are being jammed by the Zephyrian fleet, the AI replied. However, I have detected quantum signatures consistent with human military vessels at the edge of the system. Reinforcements may be en route. Elena felt a surge of hope. How long until they arrive? Unknown. The signatures are too distant for detailed analysis. Kane studied the tactical display, his mind working through possibilities and probabilities. The resistance had proven they could fight, but they needed more than just fighting to win. They needed to strike at the heart of the Zephyrian operation. The hyperspace beacon, he said suddenly. If we can destroy it, we can prevent them from bringing in reinforcements. It's heavily guarded, Elena pointed out. The aliens have their entire fleet protecting it. Not their entire fleet, Kane corrected. They've got ships here fighting us. That's our opportunity. He began outlining a plan that seemed impossible to Elena. A small team would infiltrate the colony while the main resistance force kept the aliens distracted. They would plant explosives in the beacon's power core, destroying the device and crippling the Zephyrian invasion. I'll lead the infiltration team, Kane announced. You're not fully recovered, Dr. Warren protested. The revival process was traumatic. You need time to heal. Kane looked at her with eyes that had seen too much war. There is no time. Every hour we delay means more human worlds at risk. Elena realized that this was the moment of truth. Kane was offering to sacrifice himself again, just as he had 40 years ago. The man who had already given everything was preparing to give more. "I'm going with you," she said. "This isn't your fight," Kane replied gently. "Yes, it is. These are my people, my world. I won't let you face this alone." Danny Warren's voice crackled over the radio. "I'm bringing my fighter in for repairs. The command ship is damaged but still functional." "Good work," Kane replied. "Rearm and prepare for the next phase." The final battle for New Terra was about to begin. The Resistance had proven they could fight, but now they would discover if they could win. Kane looked around the command center at the faces of people who had trusted him with their lives and their future. "Remember," he told them, "we're not just fighting for ourselves. We're fighting for every human world that the Zephyrians will attack next. Today we make our stand." The legend had returned, and with him, humanity's hope for survival.